Okay, so that's the big question. How do you eat a starburst? Can we get some answers, please?
Take the paper off.
You take the wrapper off. Now, does anybody want to start with a different way of eating a starburst?
Chewing it?
Just chewing it?
Yeah.
So, Nathan, would you take the wrapper off?
I've already taken it off.
You've already taken it. Right. Well, if you'd like to eat your starburst, you can. It is relevant, by the way, in case you just thought I'd come up with something random. If you'd like to, you can. Otherwise, hold on to it, because we're going to come back to that in just a moment. We are in... Thank you, mate. Did you take one? Do you want to take another one for your trouble?
He's away, he's gone.
Okay. We are in week 2 of Ezekiel. Nick kicked us off in this series last week. If you missed it, there's an audio recording of that on the YouTube, what do you call it? Site? Station? Channel? That's the one. And it's also on the Lane WhatsApp. So if you missed it, then you can recap. That'd be great. Today we're in chapter 3, so if you've got your Bible with you, if you want to turn to Ezekiel chapter 3, that would be great. We're going to look at it in 5 parts this morning. Actually, it could be 4, because I've taken a chunk out. So it's 4 or 5 parts anyway. But before we dive into that, let's do a little bit of an overview, because it might not be one of those books that we're over familiar with, and if you are, that's great too. Ezekiel was a priest living in Jerusalem at the time of the Babylonian attack. And around 597 BC, we read that around 10,000 Jews, including Ezekiel, were taken into exile to a place called Babylon. And of course, this took place because God's people, the Israelites, had yet again disobeyed him, yet again rebelled, yet again decided to go their way rather than God's way. And so this book was written 5 years into that exile, and we're going to read again of what this looked like for Ezekiel. So we're actually going to start in chapter 2 verse 9, so just a couple of verses just before the beginning of chapter 3. So let's have a little look at this. Then I looked and I saw a hand stretched out to me. It was a scroll. In it was a scroll, which he unrolled before me. On both sides of it were written words of lament and mourning and woe. And he said to me, Son of man, eat what is before you. Eat this scroll, then go and speak to the people of Israel. So I opened my mouth, and he gave me the scroll to eat. Then he said to me, Son of man, eat this scroll that I am giving you, and fill your stomach with it. So I ate it, and it tasted as sweet as honey in my mouth. He then said to me, Son of man, go now to the people of Israel and speak my words to them. So it sounds like everybody in here thinks the correct way to eat a starburst is to take its wrapper off. And that surprises me, and also makes me think I'm now the only one that's been duped into believing that this paper is edible. Did nobody else think that the paper on Starburst was edible? I'm looking particularly at the top, particularly at my children, who told me years ago that it didn't matter. So did you know you were lying to me? You thought it was real. You absolutely you did. You used to eat it with the wrapper on, and then they would tell me, no, Dad, it's fine. You get to choose whether you eat it with the wrapper on or not. So I did some extensive research and found no evidence whatsoever that it is edible paper. None. And so when I ate one with the wrapper on, I was going, this is disgusting. Actually, it's because my children had led me astray yet again. I'm very glad to hear that you have not been led astray in that way. But we do see here in this passage something a little odd, where Ezekiel was commanded to eat a scroll. He wasn't commanded to eat a starburst of the wrapper, but he was commanded to eat a scroll. And if that wasn't odd enough, this scroll was written on both sides. Now, that wouldn't have been the custom in the ancient Near East. They'd have only written on one side of the scroll. So what that means is that the scroll was covered front and back with words. But what words? What words was the scroll? This isn't the scroll, and I don't think it would have been quite this big, and I don't think it would have been on flip chart paper. But on the scroll, we read that the words were of lament, mourning, and woe. In other words, these were words of judgment, correction, sorrow, distress, and rebuke. So, what do we do with that? Well, unlike the starburst wrappers, the scroll tasted sweet. Now, that perhaps is miraculous in itself, for I don't think it was edible paper, like the starburst is not edible paper. I'm having you after, I'm telling you. So, there was a miracle in the sense that it tasted sweet, perhaps, in the first instance. But it's an odd thing, really, because you would think words that are so heavy, so negative as this, why would they taste sweet? You would think it would make much more sense if Ezekiel ate this scroll and it was bitter and it was sour. So why is that? Well, we get a clue, I think, in the Psalms. In Psalm 19:10 in particular, it says this: the decrees of the Lord are sweeter than honey from the honeycomb. By them your servant is warned. In keeping them there is great reward. Have we got any honey fans here? Oh, we do. Would anyone like some honey this morning? Come on, Steve, you'd like some honey? Come on, let's get it going. Now, what could possibly go wrong, Steve? I've got no paper here at all. Okay, you're going to go with that. There we go. Come on, quick. Yes. How's that taste? Is that good? Yeah? Yeah. I was going to say anybody else, but no, maybe not. Let's leave that. Honey in the Bible, you may know, can symbolize various things. It symbolized God's rescue and provision. The Israelite people were told that they would be brought to a place flowing with milk and honey. It can represent his goodness, his grace. But here, the scroll was symbolic of the sweetness of God's words, because following his decrees, as we see there in Psalm 19:10, can bring great reward. And so even though these words were negative, even though these words were heavy, even though these words would have been bitter in the sense that they were words of judgment, even there, redemption can be found if his people would seek him again, look to him again. It wouldn't stop the judgment. The judgment had already taken place and more would follow. But it doesn't take away from the sweetness of God's words to the Israelite people as it can do to us today. Jeremiah 2 spoke of eating the words that God gave him. It's as if the prophets needed to first consume, if you will, something of what God was saying to his people in order to then be able to better communicate it. So it's Christmas evening, and I don't know what you were eating Christmas Day evening this year, but I was horrified when my niece and nephew, having had, Christmas dinner and whatever else we'd had, and then you get into nibbles in the night, went and got a jar of gherkins. Does anybody like gherkins? What is the matter? I mean, come on. They're bad enough just in a McDonald's, just in the burger, that little slice. But they... Gosh, didn't think this through, did I? Oh, gosh. That is actually disgusting. Did that go on? Really one of the new trainers?
Oh, no.
If you don't understand that reference, go back on YouTube. That is actually disgusting. And one by one, and I can only use a fork, I can't touch them. One by one, they got the... I mean, seriously. That's nice. Come on then.
Oh,
Come on, turn around. Ah, that is... And now I actually do have a bit of tissue. I can't have that on my hands. That is just disgusting. One by one, they were, and because they knew I hated it in front of me, and I think they polished off the whole jar between them. Now, there was something about that where, because they had consumed these gherkins, it gave them the authenticity that, having had that experience of eating the gherkins, that they could then speak of what they had eaten. And I think it's something like that with the prophecy of Jeremiah and Ezekiel, because they consumed and chewed on the words and felt something of the weight of these words to the Israelite people. It kind of authenticated all the more the words that they were then bringing to God's people. But it's not just in the Old Testament. You might be aware that in Revelation, we see this too. Revelation 10, 8 to 10, he said to me, take it and eat it. It will turn your stomach sour. But in your mouth, it will be sweet as honey. And here we get the idea that it's a bittersweet experience because of perhaps the challenge of God's word, but the sweetness of what it can bring. It didn't mean the Israelite people could escape the consequence of their actions. They couldn't escape judgment in that sense, but they could, if they would, turn back to God in that place. And with the amount of people that are in this room today, however many are here, there will definitely be those of us here that are in bitter experiences right now, are in circumstances that they would rather not be in because of their own actions, the actions of others, or just life, sadly, as sometimes life turns out. And that can be really, really hard. But within that bitterness, there can still be a sweetness. Not that suddenly your circumstances are completely changed and everything's now fine. But I believe that there's something very strong for us here this morning to remember that even in the most bitter circumstances, even if it's because of our own actions, i.e. we're in the situation because of what we've done, that by the grace of God that we can still know the sweetness of his word and the fruit of that in our lives if we will still turn to him. Let's pick up the passage again in verse 5. You are not being sent to a people of obscure speech and strange language, but to the people of Israel. Not to many peoples of obscure speech and strange language, whose words you cannot understand. Surely if I had sent you to them, they would have listened to you. But the people of Israel are not willing to listen to you, because they are not willing to listen to me. For all the Israelites are hardened and obstinate, but I will make you as unyielding and hardened as they are. I will make your forehead like the hardest stone, harder than flint. Do not be afraid of them or terrified by them, though they are a rebellious people. And he said to me, Son of man, listen carefully and take to heart all the words I speak to you. Go now to your people in exile and speak to them. Say to them, this is what the sovereign Lord says, whether they listen or fail to listen. Nick spoke around this last week, so we're not going to speak about that too much. If you weren't there, as I say, listen to it this week. But Ezekiel was commanded to speak not to a foreign people, but to his own people. Now, I was going to do a little poll on the men's WhatsApp, and I just decided against it in the end to just see, for the guys, who feels more comfortable speaking about Jesus to people that they know, and who feels more comfortable about speaking about Jesus with people that they don't know. And so I'm not going to ask for hands, but we're all different, aren't we? If we were asked to go to a foreign nation, a foreign people, or just somewhere else in Liverpool where people didn't know us, some of us might feel more comfortable speaking to people that we might never meet again. Whereas others of us might feel much more comfortable speaking to those in the office. There's different things for different people, aren't there? There's that fear sometimes of, yeah, but if it doesn't go well, I've got to go to the office the next day and I've got to face them again. For others, it's, well, that person, I don't know anything about them. How might they receive it? We are all different. I was in McDonald's with my friend Adrian just a few months ago. I looked at you, Bex. That freaked me out. Adrian was there a minute ago. And it just... There he is! I knew he was here. Just wasn't who I was expecting. Anyway, so Adrian and I were in McDonald's a few months ago. I think it was last year sometime. And we were doing what you do in McDonald's, weren't we, Adrian? What do you eat at McDonald's, Adrian?
Fries and ice cream, Rob.
Yes, okay. Fries and McFlurry. Now, can I just make sure that everybody is on board with this one, that there is absolutely no conflict with taking your fries, dipping them in your McFlurry and eating them? Can I see hands for this one, please?
Yeah, I'd go with that as well.
Yes, excellent, good. Not many, not enough of you. There's your homework by next week, okay? Swerve the gherkins, just go straight to McDonald's, fries and McFlurry. Wonderful. Anyway, we're enjoying, the delicacies of that meal, if you can call it a meal. And there was a chap just at the table next to us, just cleaning, doing his job. And I can't remember how the conversation started, but how you doing, that type of thing. And within, I would say, about 30 to 40 seconds, Adrian began telling him his life story. And the lad was listening. So it wasn't like one of those where he's going, yeah, all right, mate, all right. He was engaged. Within about 90 seconds of that starting, we were on to Jesus. And then about a minute later, not only was Adrian saying, would you like to come to church? He was ending that with, so will you come Sunday? And I was just like, wow. To go from that wonderful meal to a guy doing his job cleaning to how are you doing to this is me, this is who I found, would you like to meet him? I don't know about you, maybe that is your gifting. Clearly Adrian has the gift of evangelism, and it was just really exciting to see that just flow from him. That might be your gift too. Amazing. Fan it into flame. Wherever you are, keep doing, keep being you. But for those of us who are inspired by that and challenged to go, oh, I find that so hard, what are you doing Tuesday night? If you can, be there. Because these are skills that we can learn. Okay, it might not come as easy, it might be a bit clunkier than those who have that gift. But we can be like those people who Wally was referring to there. We can be like those people that can speak to others that don't know Jesus. It is the best news, isn't it?
Yeah.
And yet we can find it so hard to share it, whether that is with people that we don't know or people that we do know, like Ezekiel was going to Tuesday night. I don't know if the slide's still there. If you put that one on, Harry, that'd be great. Just a little reminder for Tuesday. It'd be fantastic to see you there. Verse 12. Then the Spirit lifted me up, and I heard behind me a loud rumbling sound as the glory of the Lord rose from the place where it was standing. It was the sound of the wings of the living creatures brushing against each other, and the sound of the wheels beside them. A loud rumbling sound. The Spirit then lifted me up and took me away, and I went in bitterness and in the anger of my spirit, with the strong hand of the Lord on me. I came to the exiles who lived at Tel Aviv near the Kebar River, and there, where they were living, I sat among them for 7 days, deeply distressed. Ezekiel once again has the amazing experience, as we heard last week, of hearing the glory of God coming from these 4 creatures. But it didn't take away from the reality of where Ezekiel was. Ezekiel had been taken away from his home into exile due to his people's rebellion against God. And now, as we heard last week, he was to speak words of judgment to them from God. And just as a nice little sweetener, they're not going to listen. And consequently, we read, verse 14, that he went in bitterness and in the anger of his spirit. Verse 15, that he was deeply distressed. He had bitterness, he had distress, he had anger. Now, there's some different schools of thought as to why he was so distressed. Some believing that it was because of what he'd been commissioned to do, that his anger was towards God. How can you make me do this? Particularly when it feels like such a waste of time that they wouldn't even listen. Others believing that the distress was at the people around him. You've caused this. Look at the mess. Maybe it's a little bit of both. But either way, he had bitterness, he had distress, and he had anger. So in August 2015, I found myself in Manchester Departure Lounge. And you might remember that there was a group of 22 of us that went to Manchester Airport in August 2015, nearly 10 years ago. And yet, as we took off on the Emirates plane, there was only 16 of us that took off that day. 6 couldn't fly. 4 actually were prevented from flying. 2 other leaders stayed with those 4 young people because there is an irregularity. In fact, there were 2 irregularities with the paperwork. Many of you will remember the story. And as we took off from that runway, and as we climbed in altitude, it is very difficult for me to convey to you the distress in my heart. Because for a year as a group, we had worked hard, raising over £30,000 to go as a group to South Africa on this missions trip. We had prayed about it. We had planned. We'd had so much fun. We'd had challenge. And here the day had come, and it was all going wrong. And so therefore, if it's difficult for me to convey what that was like, it's perhaps even more difficult to convey what it was like when we flew into Dubai, where we had to change to then obviously fly to Johannesburg, to get a telephone call, I think it was from Dave Pendo, to say that the two leaders were on a flight. And I said, 2? He said, yeah, because the 4 young people were again stopped from flying. The paperwork still wasn't right. Sometimes there aren't words, are there, for the way that we're feeling. And so I gathered the group. We're at the departure lounge. We weren't long from needing to fly again. And I gathered the 16 of us. And I said, guys, we just need to pray. And I opened my mouth to pray, and I just sobbed. I feel very emotional now, just remembering how I felt. I just sobbed. And others, young people and leaders, began to pray. I could not find the words. I can't remember exactly when it was. I can't remember if it was days or weeks later, but one of that group came to me and they said to me, do you know, Rob, I've got something to tell you. I've become a Christian. I said, that's amazing. That was so exciting. This wasn't a young person from the church. They'd come on the trip as part of the community. Wonderful news. I said, when? Like, how? Tell me. He said, you know when we were praying in the departure lounge at Dubai Airport? He just said, the Spirit was there. And I was gobsmacked. Utterly gobsmacked. Because at the point in my life where I felt utterly distressed, like everything had gone wrong, and feelings of failure flying everywhere, all over my mind, wanting to just go home and cry, the Spirit of the Lord was on us. The Spirit of the Lord was on me. The Spirit of the Lord was on that young person. The Spirit of the Lord was on that group. And we went on to have a fantastic week. If you don't believe me, speak to those that flew the first time and those that flew the second time. We had an incredible time. Why? because the Spirit of the Lord was upon us. Ezekiel had bitterness, he had anger, he had distress, but he also had the hand of the Lord upon him. And church, today we need to get a hold of this. And some of us who are just crying on the inside, then when we leave this place, maybe be crying at home, or at some point in this week or in the weeks ahead, we're going to be faced with just grief and difficulty. We need to get a hold of this. That in our darkest, bleakest, distressing moments, that maybe we can't get out of because life has just happened and it is so hard. Even there, the hand of the Lord can be upon you. The power of the risen Christ can be in you. And that you can know what it is to soar inwardly. No, sadly, not necessarily out of your circumstance. Sometimes it's within them. That Ezekiel experienced that the hand of the Lord was in him, enabling him to do and to be who he needs to be and what he needs to do right there in the midst of exile. And I feel very strongly this morning, this is why I've left out a whole chunk, that this is what God is wanting us to know in no uncertain terms this morning. That if you are in this place right now, you are not alone. Yeah. And that the hand of the Lord is upon you. And that he sees you. And he knows you. And that he loves you. Even in your distress. In your fear. In your anxiety. In those circumstances that you just do not want to be in. I just know that that is what God has laid on my heart for us today. To proclaim and speak over us. And if that's not where you are today, you don't need to feel guilty about that. Praise God that that's not where you are today. But know this, that should that day come, that is going to be as true on that day as it is for those of us who are struggling today. We haven't got time to read through, but I think that the entirety of the rest of the passage, but let's just pick up verse 22 and verses 24, Harry, if we can have this on the screen, because this really cements it. The hand of the Lord was on me there. Verse 24. Then the Spirit came into me and raised me to my feet. If you're able and you want to, I'm going to invite you to stand to your feet. I'm going to ask the worship team to just join me. You see, Ezekiel had seen this vision in the previous chapter. And he was face down. And he received these bizarre instructions from God to go into his home. That he was going to be tied up. That he was going to be unable to speak. Enforced seclusion. Enforced arrest. And enforced silence. And that was to be a dramatization of what the Israelite people had done, what they had caused, that alienation between them and God. And Ezekiel was now tasked with communicating this. And it probably felt impossible. I'm just going to invite you to close your eyes. Just from the point of view of being able to concentrate on what God is trying to say to us this morning, both corporately and individually.